My name is Mike, I'm 23 years old, and in September of 2020, I started studying sports at EHSM in Mocklingen, Switzerland. And in this video, I want to give you 5 reasons why you should maybe not do the same. The first one is that you learn a lot of stuff that is absolutely self-evident or totally unnecessary. And this reminds me very much of my time at BMS, where we had subjects like history, where we learned stuff that I really didn't care about, like the French Revolution, for example. Or even in German, we learned how to categorize possessive pronouns, which I never had to ever do again. And while it's definitely not as bad here at EHSM, I still sometimes wonder why I would need to know or to learn how a resting membrane potential gets activated. And if you have no clue what I'm talking about, then guess what? That's exactly the point. Unless you're someone working in the field of biology or chemistry, you just don't need to know that. Or in economics, we learned that the higher the price of a good is, the fewer people will buy it. Don't you say? Sometimes it just feels like a big waste of time because the stuff you learn you'll either just never use again, or it's self-evident, but you have to pack it into a model only to recall it exactly in this way at the test. And this kind of ties in with reason number 2, which is that way too much stuff is being taught. We have school every day from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Except for Friday afternoons, they are off. But still, that's much more than any other kind of study I know. There's a professor called Richard David Precht who has written a book on the German school system in which he says that we have found out through many empirical studies that the more stuff we try to teach, the less sticks. And that's exactly how I experience it. Now in the second semester, we have a course called Motor Learning. And now in the 7th lecture, we still repeat concepts from the very first lecture. So there's not a lot of stuff being taught. It's mainly about different learning strategies. But if you would now ask me, Mike, what is differential learning? What is implicit learning? What is explicit learning? I could exactly explain it to you. I could give you examples and even show it to you. But in the first semester, we had courses like physiology or biochemistry, where we were just bombarded with stuff about the human body. And if you were now to ask me, Mike, how does the human heart works? I'd say like, it pumps blood through the body, and there's something that's called aorta, I guess. But I basically forgot everything. And I very much experienced that through the end of the first semester, where we had a couple of weeks' time to just press a ton of knowledge into our brains, only to forget it the second after we finished the final test. And with COVID-19, this has gotten even worse, because all the theories we learned in the lectures, we couldn't apply into practice because they drastically limited the amount of practical lessons. Before I started studying sports, I was teaching a bunch of youngsters how to play volleyball. And in about half a year, I learned much more about the motivation of children than in all lectures of the first semester. Just because I got to apply it before and I can't do that now. The third reason is that the information density in a typical lecture is much lower than on YouTube. See, the competition on YouTube has gotten so high that the quality of the videos have gotten so good. In a 20-minute YouTube video, you can learn as much as in a 90-minute lecture. The density of information in a good quality YouTube video is so high, you get bombarded with relevant information. Whereas in your typical lecture, there are technical problems, there are pauses, there's unnecessary info, You maybe lose your attention, or the teacher loses their train of thought, and it's just very hard to follow a lecture. My trick has been to always, when possible, eat during the lecture. Because whenever I feel like I'm not missing out on anything at a given moment, I just switch my concentration to the food I'm eating. Reason number 4 are the high opportunity costs you have. One ECTS, so one credit, is worth around 25 to 30 hours of work. When you multiply this by the 180 credits you need for your bachelor's degree, it turns out to about 5,000 hours of work. If you were to work in a normal job, maybe after your apprenticeship, you would earn around $4,700 a month, which in 3 years would turn out to $170,000. You could also start a business and fail and do this over again, 6 times or so. Or you could travel the world or do whatever you want. So the opportunity cost is just really high when you study 3 years. Reason number 5 is that you can't work as a sports teacher after your graduation. So many people ask me, "Oh Mike, when you finish studying sports, what do? Do you work as a sports teacher?" And around 50% of people who study sports intend to work as a sports teacher afterwards. But if you are one of them, you have to do much more than your bachelor's degree in sports. It really depends which age range you want to teach. If you want to teach primary school children, you don't actually need your bachelor's degree in sports at all. Instead, you have to attain a bachelor's degree at the PH. In German, that's the Pädagogische Hochschule. In English, it's the College of Education, or also the Teacher Training College. Which means you're looking at another 3 years before you can teach sports to primary school children. If you want to teach sports to secondary school children, so in Switzerland that's 7th to 9th grade, you also need a few subjects from the bachelor's at the PH, and then you need to add a master's degree at the PH. So you're looking at another 2 to 2.5 years of studies to teach sports to secondary school children, which means that your bachelor's in sports is kind of useless as well. If you want to teach secondary level 2, which means being a teacher at colleges or vocational schools, in German Berufsschule, your path is basically the same as with secondary schools, but you have to add another year to attain your teaching diploma. Note that these requirements change all the time, so maybe in 2 years from now, this is not accurate anymore. So let's conclude the 5 reasons why you maybe shouldn't study sports. Number 1, you learn a lot of stuff that is self-evident and you already know, as well as a lot of stuff that is totally unnecessary and you'll never use again. Number 2, there's so much stuff being taught that I'd argue a few months after your final exam, you will have forgotten more than half of it, which kind of makes studying useless and it's a very hard drain on your motivation. Number 3, the information density in your typical lecture is so low compared to a YouTube video that it's very hard to follow the lectures. Number 4, there's a very high opportunity cost. Within these 3 years that you study, you could do so many other things. Number 5, if you want to work as a sports teacher, studying sports is basically useless because you have to do so much other degrees after it that you might as well start at the PH in the first place. So what's my recommendation? Very simple. Don't study sports or any other subject unless you need the degree to pursue your dream vocation. Now that's been the video, guys. But obviously there are also a few good reasons why you could or should study sports. And I made a separate video on this which you can watch right here. So make sure you check that out. And if you liked my rant on why you shouldn't study sports, give this video a thumbs up and I'll see you in the next one.